Welcome to the guests whose faces I can't see and the guests whose faces I can see. I'm the symbologist, Michelle Snyder, and we were just discussing how long ago it was that I decided to actually pursue symbols. And it was a couple of good decades ago that I started actually pursuing this as a study. And I went through my postgrad and all of that. So it's a world that's hard to escape from once you get hooked on it. And maybe we'll see some of you have an epiphany or an aha moment or really get interested in what this means, because symbolism to me is far more than just, like, people think symbolism is mystical or tarot cards, and that's true, but it is a much bigger world. So we're going to be looking at some slides today. I have a presentation to show. And then after the slides, we're going to give away a gift to somebody who's on camera. Got to be on camera to win. And then we will have questions and answers if there are any, and that would be fine. This will be recorded, and if you want to watch it again or know somebody who might like to watch it, they can do that. It'll be, I think we're putting it on Vimeo, so the link will be there. So I'm going to get just 2 minutes more, and we'll start the presentation. It was an interesting start for me. I was teaching art for decades, for about 40 years. And in 2000, I ended up in a wheelchair. And it's very difficult to teach art to children when you're in a wheelchair because they discover that erasers bounce. And it's very difficult to calm that down when you're in a wheelchair. And I said, okay, what am I going to do with myself? Because my brain was still going. And I read, well, I didn't read it, but my husband read the Da Vinci Code to me. And I got very fascinated with that book, not for the same reason as everyone else, but because Robert Langdon was a symbologist. I said, what is a symbologist? I've got to do this. And so I pursued my postgraduate degree with my mentor, Dr. Ensman, who was thrilled with this pursuit, and landed here with, I've written 5 books on symbology and a bunch of fiction books based on what I've learned. But it is a fun place to be once you understand what you're looking at. But it's also something I think people should really know, because we can't live and communicate without symbols. So we'll get into that a little bit too. So as we, oh, don't go away, Rick. It was fun to have a face. So, so I am going to start the presentation. Let's see. Hi. So I'm going to share the screen, and there. Can you see that? My assistant director, can you see that? You can. Okay. So I was just talking about how I ended up on this long road of symbology. There was a lot to learn. You think, well, you can just look at pictures and decide what they mean, but it's not really that simple. And we'll go through the rules and the secrets of how to look at a symbol. And this applies, all of this information applies to a symbol if you want to read a word, because letters are symbols, or if you have some weird symbol that you know it means something, but you just don't know what it means, but you know it means something. It gives these images a very mysterious quality. And so we'll look at how you can interpret those as well. So welcome to the Symbologist Secrets. And I hope you enjoy this presentation as much as I enjoyed making it. So how it all began, like I was saying, I've been drawing since I was 2, taught art for decades. I landed in a wheelchair in 2000, but it's just my temperament to make lemonade from lemons. So I decided then, I think I read probably 20 or 30 symbol dictionaries and encyclopedias from A to Z. And I do mean I read all of them. And that was quite an achievement in itself. And then I worked with my mentor, Dr. Ensman, and got my postgrad degree done through the University of Wales, which was a fascinating and it was quite a lot of work, but I learned a tremendous amount. And my passion for this is such that I really want to share it with people. So that's how it all began. I think probably at age 2 when I picked up my first piece of chalk. That's probably when it started. So the paradigm shift that I had to go through working with Dr. Ensman is to realize that language doesn't just land on a culture, it develops. And so we have etymology of words. Well, symbols are the same way. They have an etymology. And I had to go through some learning of history that I didn't know and things like that. Now, the RX symbol is what really caught my attention. And what you're looking at right here is an inscription on a stone from 12,500 BC. And if you can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but if you look at the long black streak, there's an oval at the top of it, and it's got a front piece of the R that comes down, and it's got an X at the bottom of it. There. Okay. So the medicine lady stone is all of these inscriptions that you see. The RX is on that inscription, and he has translated the inscriptions from Ice Age language and published that book. So he could read this stone, and what he discovered was that this symbol means medicine lady and medicine, and she was the matriarch that organized all the clans that did the mammoth hunts, and people got hurt. So as the medicine lady, she would bring her medicines and she would organize, and they would have their very dramatic, huge mammoth hunts. And that's what kept them alive, with meat and all of the bones and all of the hair. They used it all. So this is how old our RX symbol is, 14,000 years that we know of. So I'm thinking, wow, what else is like this? Because this can't be the only thing. So I want you to realize that we are going to look at prehistory a little bit, and you can, if you're interested in this, you can use my books as research, because I do introduce a lot of this work that he did and put it in context of the history of symbols. So the questions that everyone asks is like, what is a symbol? And so then what is a symbologist? And what do you see in symbols? Well, first, let me ask you all an interesting question. How many symbols do you think you look at every day? And the more you learn about what symbols are, the more I think that is a non-answerable question. I don't think we can count them. Because a symbol, people, if you go onto Google, you'll find icons and logos and all of these other words, but they're all symbols. A symbol in its basic meaning is an abstraction of an idea, a concept, or a thing. Because our communication depends on using letters and numbers and pictures that represent things, because we can't just go out and bring the tree in the house and say, see, look at this thing. We have to use the word tree, which is a symbol for the actual thing. And that's how communication works. So if you think about it, you're looking at a computer screen, there's got to be dozens of symbols just there. And it becomes very important to the communication of human beings as you understand what a symbol really is and its role in our lives. Now, one of the things that I learned is that language begins with nouns. You can't have a verb without a thing to apply to. You can't have an adjective without a thing to apply to. So symbols are made of nouns. So in this illustration here, what nouns do you see? There are three major parts to this symbol. I know people love the centaurs and they'd like to think they were real, but this represents Chiron. He's a Greek hero. So what do you see? We see the part of a horse, we see the top of a man, and we see a bow. Well, why is this symbol here? That's where my brain goes. Okay, so I see that, but why? Why is it there? So think about this. If you look in Greek history, you'll find that Chiron was an astronomer, a physician, a musician, a strategist, an archer, and a warrior. He taught the heroes like Hercules and Asclepius. So this man, he was a Renaissance man before the Renaissance. He was brilliant. And he was brilliant at warfare, and he rode a horse with his bow and arrow. So I'm thinking, well, okay, so a centurion leads 100 soldiers. So a centaur must be a leader of 100 horseback arched archers with bows and arrows, warriors. That makes sense to me. And when I ran this past Dr. Ensman, he said that's absolutely correct. So why is he a constellation? Well, if you're going to have a hero like this in your culture, how do you remember him? The stars were what everyone saw all the time. They were always there. They never changed. And so they put him in Zeus, put him in the sky to remember and honor him. And this is how you would draw him. That's why we have centaurs. And so that's how you take a symbol apart. You look at its pieces and you see how they're put together. And then you got to know some history because you need that context. So there's three rules, three secrets of symbology. So what is a symbology? A symbology is a system of communication, like English. English is a symbology. Chinese is a symbology. Heraldry is a symbology. So all of these kinds of what I call symbol systems, they're separate symbologies. A symbologist is one who studies the symbols and the symbol systems. So when I do this, I have to look. People look at things and they don't really see them, and I'm included in that. So I have to work really hard to make sure I'm really looking to see what is there. The police will tell you that when they take witness statements from an accident where everybody sees the same event, nobody gives the same account. And that's because we all see with our eyes, well, through our eyes to our brain. And what our brain recognizes and tells us we see depends a lot upon who we are. So it's personal. Everything you see is very personal. So we have to look at and really see things. You have to notice the patterns, count things, count the dots, the stripes, the stars, how many things there are. And you have to notice the relationships of the parts to each other. So this is one of the things that I was really flabbergasted that I did not see. My husband Jay actually saw this. This is the Aztec sunstone, the red circle, and the face in the middle of the red circle is on the right. I never put it together that that is the face of a Gorgon, but it is a face of a Gorgon. I know why it's there now because I researched how it got there. But people see the sunstone, it's from a South American culture. Why would it have a Greek Gorgon in the middle of it? And that's the looking through the historic timeline and working with Bob Ensman, that's how I figured that out. But this is an example of you've got to really look at what you're looking at and see the parts of what you're looking at. That's complicated. It's a calendar. And maybe some of you remember 2012, the world was supposed to end because the Aztec calendar came to an end. Well, no, it didn't, but that's okay. And the other question I had was, okay, so this Aztec sun calendar is accurate to the second. But the Aztecs grew corn. They don't really need a calendar that's accurate to the second. So the story of this calendar is that it was actually created by the megalithic mariners, and the Phoenicians took it from them. They knew how to read it, but they didn't know how to make it. And they migrated to South America, and it was adopted by the Aztecs. So that's why it looks like an Aztec drawing, but it has the Greek Gorgon on the middle because it meant something. It's not just there for decoration. All of these pieces mean something. And a lot of the old symbols that we look at are based in astronomy. So you've got to really look at what you're looking at and see what's there. So people don't tend to notice patterns. I mean, not separately. We see the pattern altogether, or their relationship to each other. So these are illustrations of the sun god's chariot. So what do you see there in terms of counting the patterns? Every single one of them has 4 horses. So I said, well, why is that? They represent the 4 seasons through which they pull the sun. And when you think about that, that's logical, makes sense. And a lot of the things that I have discovered looking at symbols that are like this do make sense. So this is why you count the patterns. You have to know what's there. Now, these sun gods, they're different. The other thing that we have to do, the third secret, is noticing the nature of relationships. So here are some images. The big one is probably familiar to all of you. It's the eye with the rays coming out. And my question to you is, how many rays are there? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so there are 8. And in ancient symbolism, things that come in 8s generally allude to Venus. Venus makes a pentagonal pattern in the sky every 8 years. And in 40 years, it's absolutely precisely back where it started. And if you want to know how that works, you can Google that, because I'm not going to explain the astronomy here. It's my brain doesn't work that way. I see the pictures. So the number 8 alludes to Venus. Okay, so how are the other image that we see there? The other piece of this is a human eye. It looks human. It doesn't look like a horse eye or any kind of alligator eye. It looks human. So why are these rays coming from or going to this human eye? And so that is what a sentence is. You have to read the words as they all relate together. So this is like a sentence. So this symbol is more than 50,000 years old. And it symbolizes a master astronomer. Yes, it symbolizes more now, because as symbols migrate and grow with cultures, they have layers like onions, and it changes or adds to the basic meaning of the symbol. But that's what the symbol started out to mean. And the other one up on the right, that doesn't have the rays coming out that count to Venus, but it is the eye of God who sees all of the heavens. And the square and compass, that's a Masonic symbol. And when they look at this, they have to be aware of where the points of the compass are. This one, both points are in front of the square. There's one that has one point behind the square, and one where both points are behind the square. Each one of those has a specific meaning in the Masonry symbolic code. So a lot of what we see like these are very old. They go way back. And so you've got to count and look at how the pieces are put together. So those are the 3 secrets of looking at any symbol that you want to know what it means. You do have to have some history, and you've got to understand how old things are, and then you can really draw out some secrets from symbols. But there's a rule. So this says follow the rules, but the label I put on it, it's hard to read. Why? Because it's not in the proper order. Context is really important when you look at a symbol. You've got to understand how long ago was this symbol made, who made it, when it was made, what it's made of or for, and how it was used. So it's who, what, when, where, how, and why. You can't always answer all of those questions, but that's necessary. So let's look at an example. So this is a ruler and a ruler. So I asked Bob, why do they call a ruler a ruler? Because a ruler has lines on it, measures. He said, well, kings are the people who decided how much the taxes were going to be, and that started out usually being grain and crops. So they're the ones that measured how much was to be given in taxes. They were in charge of weights and measures, the kings, from prehistory on. So that's why we call a ruler a ruler. And in some cultures, white cats are bad luck. And it's like asking what language. All these words are different languages for the word context. So you got to know what language it's in. Finding the context gives you the foundation for where that symbol came from. And you can figure out what it means from there. One of the most important things that I did was do comparisons of oral tradition and symbols. Oral tradition is a system for a culture to use to preserve its history and knowledge, traditions and ethics, and pass them on before there was writing. Everything that was preserved and taught was done with stories and pictures until we had writing. Tens of thousands of years old, some of these stories are. Mothers have told stories to children to teach them since there have been mothers. And your guess is as good as mine as to how long ago that was, but it was really, really long ago. Oral tradition is what we call those stories. Let's look at one. You're all familiar probably with Snow White, but do you know why the title of the story is Snow White? Because her skin was white. And there was a race of people from the Magdalenian culture where the RX symbol was made who had snow white skin, because there was about 1,000 years in Europe when there was very little sunshine, just enough to keep things alive. If you know anything about the pigmentation of skin, you have to create vitamin D. So if you don't create vitamin D, you get rickets, and in one generation, everybody dies. The whiter the skin, the better it was to survive. And so we have the white-skinned people. They were called the fair folk, and you know them as fairies. So they're fair-skinned, and Snow White was one of their ancestors. This story starts in a time of desperation and fear because there were a lot of invasions, kingdoms going on. It's at least 6,000 years old. Now, the symbolism in the story is important, like the Wicked Queen. She's the invader, and Snow White is the last heir to the throne, so she wants Snow White dead. Now, the magic mirror, mirror, mirror on the wall, gave her information, and the magic mirror represents a refractive lens. They fought wars over these lenses because you could see far away, you could see who was coming. You could read the stars, and in those days, that meant you could survive more easily than someone else. So that was the object of the war. Now, in essence, the dwarves are the main characters of this story. There were 7 of them, and they represented the 7 known planets of antiquity, but they also, they were miners. Remember, they're always digging in the mines. They also represented the metals of antiquity that they used for metallurgy, which were copper, gold, lead, tin, iron, silver, and mercury. The 7 dwarves represented the planets and the metals, but they also represent the place where the refugees from these invaded kingdoms fled to, in the outskirt villages. That's where they went. The queen attempts to kill Snow White in a few ways. One of them is with a comb. Now, we think of a comb now, we think of plastic, but they didn't have plastic then. Combs were metal. And so the comb that almost kills Snow White represents poison by metal, like arsenic. Then she tries to kill her with a poisoned apple. Well, that represents death by organics, like cyanide. And you're thinking they knew about those in 6,000 BC? Oh, yes, they did. They did. And then she tries to lace her bodice so tight with a cord that she can't breathe and she's going to suffocate. And that represents death by airborne gases. Now, people say Grimm's fairy tales, the fairy tales are so horrible and dark. Yes, they were. This represents some really brutal times. And unlike a lot of the fairy tales that we read, most of these stories really didn't have happy endings. But you don't want to just pass on doom and gloom to the next generation. So they put in a Prince Charming that saves the princess who's going to die otherwise, to pass hope on to the next generation. This is one fairy tale, and we've gotten a lot of history out of it. We know they did metallurgy. We know now what metals they knew. They knew about the 7 planets of antiquity, and we know that they were invaded and that people escaped to the outer villages where the dwarves lived. That's a lot just from a fairy tale. Let's look at a children's poem. And we think, well, kids' poems, what are we doing? We teach kids' poems, but this one Hey Diddle Diddle, dates back to 5400 BC. It's a poem about astronomy. And most of the really old children's poems, they are for teaching. We just don't remember what those things mean anymore. Even though they're words, we can say the words, but we don't know how the words are connected with the knowledge, right? Astronomical knowledge was essential for survival. If you couldn't read the skies, you had no idea where you were, or what time of year it was, or anything, because they didn't have our clocks. They didn't have computers. How are they supposed to know where they are if you can't read the stars? And so these stories were created and passed on through the generations to pass this knowledge on. Now, in this one, the cat and the plow are in the constellation, are the constellation Canis Minor. The fiddle is the plow. The cat represents the rodent control in the fields, because if you're growing grain and you have it in a silo, you cannot have even one mouse because it will poison. You don't know the difference between the grain and the poop. You've got to have it clean. And so cats and owls and snakes are very important. So he represents rodent control in the fields. The dish and the spoon symbolize Eridanus, which is a constellation represented as a river. And if you go and look at the sky, you can see it. And there's a place where it bowls out. It's got this other thing and it comes around like this. And it looks like the spoon laying in the bowl. The cow represents the horns of Venus, which is a complex and very rare astronomical sight that you can see if you know what to look for. And you can look all of these things up on Google and find a lot of them yourself. Now, the little laughing dog is Sirius the star in Canis Major. This whole thing represents the fact that the growing season laughs bountiful. So what does that tell you? This is the growing season. So this must be late summer or summer, late spring, summer, and fall. The dish and the spoon are so full, it's more than we can eat. This is how important it is to understand what you're looking at and what's come our way from prehistory, from ancestors that are tens of thousands of years old. Knowledge has accumulated, but knowledge has a lifespan. It only stays on the shelf for a certain amount of time. You don't always know. And it also, I mean, how many people on this program remember what a CD is or know what LP means? This technology isn't really that old. You do? Okay, excellent. Vinyl records are coming back. I don't know that they're as good as the ones they used to make. I have a few of the old ones, but it just shows you that knowledge, it deteriorates because if it doesn't get taught, it gets forgotten. And so we don't even know half of what's there. And I know there's a prize coming for someone who's on camera. So we're going to do that in another minute or two. I'm going to give away a 20-minute video class on the symbolism of oral tradition that I sell. So that will be fun. Just in closing, again, how many symbols do you see every day? I think it's unknowable. You know, and where do they come from and what do they mean? We have symbols on our computers and on our phones. We have symbols on our computer. Here's one. So you have a computer, and when you click save, do you know what that's a picture of? You know why that symbol is used to tell you to save? Well, of course, Holly knows because I told her. So, but some people might. It's a floppy disk from an early computer system onto which you saved all of your information. But I'll tell you what, in another 10 years, nobody's going to remember that, or few will. But symbols are like that. They all have history. And it's really fun to figure that out sometimes. I mean, we speak in symbols. Do you realize the words that you say to other people are verbal symbols? Letters that we write symbolize the sounds that we make when we speak. Letters, numbers, maps, road signs, ads, menus, media, books, airports. Humans communicate with symbols and always have. It's not just knowing how to read an ancient symbol or knowing what came from prehistory or knowing what the symbols on your computers mean. You can't communicate without them. Your mind thinks with images. You dream with symbols. It's the language of humanity. It's really fun to dive into this, and it can be a little overwhelming. And the funnest part is finding out what things like, oh, that's a really cool picture. I wonder what that means. That's fun to be able to do that. But the respect for symbols comes when you realize that humans depend on symbols to communicate. There's an organization now that creates the modern symbolic language that every human can understand, so that when you go to an airport or a train station, you can find what you need outside of your symbolic language, like Chinese or English or Greek. They're working very hard on that. There is one symbol system called archetypes, which every person, no matter where they're from, can understand. The best example of that is mother and child. You can take a picture of a mother and child and you can show that to anyone anywhere on earth, and they're going to know what it means, and they don't have to logic that. It goes right to your associative brain function. It does not go through your language or your figuring out or your logic function. It goes right to you associate, immediately know what it means. Another one are the sun and the moon. Everybody knows what they are. They're trying to take this concept of archetypal symbols and make things that people see and know, oh, that's a bathroom, that's a baby station, that's food, that's rest. And they're doing that. It's quite a challenge. I looked at some of what they were doing. That is my introductory presentation for you all. Here are my books, and my website is thesymbologist.com. And you can go there. There's a website that you're welcome to read some of the things that are there. If you want, you can email me and we can start a discussion if you have questions. Speaking of questions, does anybody have questions right now? No? Okay. Thank you all for coming. I hope this has opened your eyes a little bit to the extent to which symbols are part of life. You can find me at my website, thesymbologist.com, and you can find my email there. If you want to start an email conversation, I'd be happy to answer any questions you think of 10 minutes after we've already stopped. It always happens to me. I go to a class and I don't know what I want to ask until it's already over. So, and you all have a magnificent day. Bye-bye now.